10 mountain climbers vanished without a trace in the unforgiving peaks of the Himalayas in 2013. 17 months later, when hope had long faded, their abandoned tent was discovered with evidence that changed everything we thought we knew about their fate. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On October 1st, 2013, the Apex climbing expedition departed from Bellingham, Washington, under skies so pristine they seemed to bless the journey ahead. The morning air carried that distinct Pacific Northwest crispness as 10 elite climbers loaded their gear into vehicles, exchanging knowing glances that spoke of both excitement and respect for the challenge ahead. Dmitry Vulov, the Russian-American expedition leader, whose reputation in mountaineering circles was nearly legendary, performed one final equipment check with methodical precision. "Mount Challenger demands nothing less than perfection," he told his hand-picked team, his accent still faintly coloring his words despite decades in America. The mountain, known for its remote location and treacherous ice formations, had been Dmitry's obsession for months. Among the climbers was Jasper Chen, whose sister Sarah would later become instrumental in unraveling the mystery. He documented everything in his journal, capturing the camaraderie and anticipation that defined their departure. The team had trained together for over a year, developing the kind of trust that mountaineers know can mean the difference between life and death. As they navigated the first alpine passes, their progress was impeccable. Radio updates came like clockwork, each transmission confirming their textbook ascent through increasingly difficult terrain. "Conditions ideal," Dmitry reported on day 3. Team morale couldn't be higher. Back in civilization, their loved ones gathered in Seattle and Vancouver, creating an informal support network. Elena Vulov, herself an accomplished climber who had reluctantly stayed behind due to a teaching commitment, coordinated the family hub in Seattle. She tracked every satellite ping from her husband's device, each message reinforcing her confidence in his leadership. "They're making better time than expected," she told the other families on day 7, who pride evident. "Dmitry says they'll reach Luna Cirque ahead of schedule." What made Apex different from other expeditions was not just their technical prowess, but their extraordinary cohesion. Each member had been selected not only for their climbing abilities, but for their psychological compatibility under extreme conditions. They moved as one organism across the mountain's unforgiving landscape, their discipline almost military in its precision. None of the waiting families could have imagined that these routine updates would soon cease. None could have predicted that these 10 individuals, representing the pinnacle of mountaineering excellence, would vanish without explanation. The thought that their loved ones would become the center of the most baffling disappearance in Cascade Mountain history was unimaginable as they celebrated each successful day of the climb. The mountain, silent and ancient, revealed nothing of what was to come as the Apex team pushed higher into its remote reaches, their yellow tent a bright spot against the gathering autumn snow. On October 15th, the satellite pings from Dmitry Vulov's team abruptly stopped. The final transmission, a standard weather update reporting clear conditions with light winds, originated from their base camp nestled in Luna Cirque. Elena Vulov sensed something was wrong immediately when her husband's routine evening message never arrived on her smartphone. "It's probably just equipment failure," the Washington State Search and Rescue Command assured worried families gathered in Seattle. The Cascade Range is notorious for communication blackouts, and our weather stations indicate a sudden storm system moved through that area. But Elena knew better. Her husband had never missed a check-in during 15 years of expeditions. By the following morning, families of all 10 climbers flooded emergency lines with panicked calls. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose brother Jasper was part of the Apex team, organized the relatives into a coordinated response unit, demanding immediate action from authorities. Within 48 hours, what would become the largest search operation in Washington's history mobilized across the mountain range. Helicopters thundered over vast ice fields while specialized rangers in bright orange gear traversed treacherous ridges. Volunteers, many fellow climbers from Bellingham and Vancouver, joined the effort, forming search lines across accessible slopes. "We're looking at over 200 personnel," announced the operation commander at a hastily arranged press conference. "Every available resource has been deployed." Day after day, the search teams returned with the same report. Nothing. No emergency flares, no equipment debris, not even footprints in the fresh snow. It was as if the entire Apex expedition had simply vanished into thin air. The Cascade Mountains had swallowed 10 elite climbers without leaving a single trace. Media outlets descended on Seattle like vultures. News vans lined the streets outside the command center, and reporters ambushed family members for emotional soundbites. Speculation ran wild across television networks and social media platforms. Some theories suggested an unprecedented avalanche had buried the team so completely that not even the emergency beacons had survived. Others whispered about equipment sabotage or navigational errors, leading the group into unmarked danger zones. Detective Ray Castellanos watched the coverage with growing unease. Though not yet assigned to the case, he recognized the familiar pattern of official statements becoming increasingly vague as days passed. The detective's thoughts drifted to his own brother, lost decades earlier in similar terrain. "They're already preparing the families for the worst," Ray muttered to himself, studying the satellite maps of Mount Challenger pinned to his wall. By November 1st, when the first heavy snows began blanketing the higher elevations, hope had dimmed considerably. The search scaled back as winter's grip tightened around the mountains, leaving 10 families in agonizing limbo, and a mystery that would haunt the Pacific Northwest for months to come. As weeks turned to months with no sign of the Apex team, the vacuum of facts bred theories that spread across the Pacific Northwest like wildfire. In coffee shops throughout Seattle and online forums, speculation ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some locals insisted a catastrophic avalanche had swept all 10 climbers into one of the Cascades' countless unmapped canyons, explaining the complete absence of evidence. Others whispered about drug cartels using remote mountain routes, suggesting the team had witnessed something they shouldn't have. Elena Volov refused to entertain these theories. The wife of expedition leader Dmitry Volov paced her Bellingham apartment, surrounded by maps and printouts. A skilled climber herself, she understood the mountain's dangers, but couldn't accept that 10 elite mountaineers would vanish without leaving a single trace. They were too experienced, too prepared, she told anyone who would listen. Her grief transformed into determination as she launched an online campaign that quickly gained traction. The website Find Apex Now became a rallying point for families demanding answers beyond the official explanation of presumed mountain accident. Detective Ray Castellanos watched Elena's press conference from his desk at the precinct. The case had landed on his desk almost by accident, a staffing shortage and his background in wilderness search operations making him the logical choice. But as he studied the faces of the missing climbers, Ray felt the familiar hollow ache in his chest. 23 years earlier, his brother Michael had disappeared during what should have been a routine trek in Olympic National Park. No body was ever recovered, no explanation ever given. The detective ran his fingers over the case file. The search and rescue reports were thorough but ultimately empty. Helicopter sweeps, ground teams, cadaver dogs, all yielding nothing. The Cascade Mountains had swallowed 10 people without a burp. Ray recognized the official language of presumed fatal accident for what it was: bureaucratic closure without answers. When his phone rang that evening, Ray was surprised to hear Elena's voice. She'd tracked down his contact information through a journalist friend. "Detective Castellanos," she said, her accent thickening with emotion. "I'm told you understand what it's like to search for someone the world has given up on." Ray closed his eyes, memories of his brother's smile flashing behind his eyelids. "I do." "Then you know I can't stop until I know what happened to them. To him." The detective glanced at the photo of Michael on his desk. This case isn't just an assignment for me anymore, Mrs. Vulov. I promise you that. For Ray, the Apex disappearance had become something deeply personal, a chance to find the closure that had eluded his own family for decades. The mountain had taken 10 more lives, and this time he wouldn't let the silence win. Winter descended upon the Cascade Mountains with unforgiving force, transforming the rugged landscape into an impenetrable fortress of ice and snow. By December, the search for the Apex team had been scaled back dramatically, the harsh conditions making it impossible for even the most experienced rescue teams to access the higher elevations of Mount Challenger. Evidence, if any remained, lay buried beneath meters of pristine white powder, preserved in a frozen tomb. On January 15th, the Washington State Search and Rescue Command issued a terse statement declaring the Apex case officially closed. The 10 climbers were presumed dead, victims of the mountain's notorious unpredictability. For many officials, it was time to move on. Elena Vulov refused to accept this conclusion. The determined woman, herself an accomplished climber who understood the mountains better than most bureaucrats, channeled her grief into action. She organized weekly rallies that rotated between Olympia and Seattle, drawing crowds that grew rather than diminished as winter deepened. Standing before the state capitol, with photographs of her husband Dmitry and the 9 other missing climbers, Elena became the unwavering voice of families demanding answers. "They want us to forget," she told a crowd of 300 supporters during a particularly bitter January afternoon. "But we will not let them bury our loved ones in paperwork the way the mountain has buried them in snow." While public attention gradually shifted to newer tragedies, Detective Ray Castellanos maintained his quiet obsession with the case. The methodical investigator converted his apartment's spare bedroom into a makeshift incident room, walls covered with maps, timelines, and weather data. He pored over satellite imagery from the days surrounding the disappearance, scrutinizing each pixel for anomalies that might have been overlooked. Ray spent his evenings interviewing every park ranger and climber who had been anywhere near Mount Challenger that fateful October. He recorded their testimonies, cross-referenced their accounts, and searched for inconsistencies that might crack open the mystery. "Something doesn't add up," he confided to Elena during one of their regular coffee meetings. 10 experienced climbers don't just vanish without leaving some trace. The detective's superiors grew increasingly frustrated with his unwillingness to move on to more current cases. But Ray's personal history, the lingering ghost of his own brother's disappearance, drove him forward, despite the professional consequences. As January gave way to February, and February to March, the weight of silence from the mountain grew heavier. The family's hope dimmed with each passing day, but never extinguished completely. They clung to Elena's fierce conviction and Ray's methodical pursuit. Then, as spring's first tentative warmth began to loosen winter's grip on the Cascades, the mountain itself started to thaw, and with it, secrets long buried beneath the snow. March 23, 2015, marked the day the Cascade Mountains finally surrendered one of their secrets. Park Ranger Caleb Morrison hadn't expected anything unusual when he'd been assigned to patrol a higher elevation than normal. The ranger station had been short-staffed that spring, forcing everyone to cover additional ground. "Just check the eastern ridges," his supervisor had told him. "Snowmelt's been heavy this year." Caleb adjusted his backpack as he hiked along an unmarked ridge. The area was well over a mile east of any established trail, certainly nowhere near where the Apex team should have been according to their filed route plan. The morning sun glinted off patches of melting snow, creating diamond-like sparkles across the landscape. He paused to catch his breath and take a swig from his water bottle. That's when he saw it. A flash of bright yellow against the gray-white backdrop of rock and snow. At first, he thought it might be some alpine wildflower making an early appearance, but as he approached, his heart began to race. A tent. Not just any tent, but a high-end expedition shelter. Its yellow fabric faded, but unmistakable, Despite 17 months of mountain weather, the structure remained eerily intact, though visibly weathered by wind and snow. "This can't be," Caleb whispered to himself, recognizing the distinctive model used by professional climbers. The ranger approached cautiously, years of training kicking in. He photographed the site from multiple angles before carefully unzipping the entrance. Inside, cooking equipment lay scattered as if knocked over in haste. Food supplies, still sealed in their waterproof bags, were stacked in one corner. The interior showed no signs of animal intrusion or collapse, just an eerie tableau frozen in time. Caleb's hands trembled as he reached for his radio. This had to be the missing Apex team's shelter. Nothing else made sense. "Base, this is Morrison," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I found a yellow expedition tent on the eastern ridge of Sector 7. Appears abandoned but intact. I believe—" He paused, steadying himself. "I believe this may be the Apex tent." The radio crackled, with shocked responses and rapid-fire questions. Caleb answered methodically while securing the perimeter, marking GPS coordinates and documenting everything. Within the hour, he received confirmation. Detective Ray Castellanos and FBI agent Sandre Torres were already en route via helicopter. The mountain had finally offered up a clue to the mysterious disappearance that had haunted the Pacific Northwest for over a year. As Caleb stood guard, the wind picked up, causing the tent to flutter. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something much darker than a simple climbing accident. Whatever happened to Dmitry Vulov and his team, the answers were beginning to emerge from beneath the melting snow. The helicopter touched down on the ridge as the sun cast long shadows across the snow. FBI agent Sandre Torres stepped out first, her breath visible in the frigid air, followed by Detective Ray Castellanos. The yellow fabric of the expedition tent flapped violently against its frame, somehow still anchored after 17 months exposed to the mountain's wrath. "Secure the perimeter," Torres ordered the recovery team, her voice carrying the weight of authority that had defined her career. Ray hung back momentarily, the scene triggering memories of his brother's disappearance decades earlier. Inside the tent, the scene told a puzzling story. Sealed food supplies, enough for several more days, remained untouched in their waterproof bags. A camping stove lay on its side, next to scattered cooking utensils, yet nothing suggested a violent struggle or panic. The detective knelt down, studying the peculiar stillness of the abandoned shelter. "They left in a hurry, but not running for their lives," Ray observed, carefully photographing everything before touching it. No tears in the fabric, no sign of forced entry. What struck the investigators most was what wasn't there. No personal effects whatsoever. No clothing, no photographs tucked into backpack pockets, no journals except one. The blood-stained notebook lay open near what would have been Dmitry Vulov's sleeping position, based on the team's known configuration. The blood pattern suggests it wasn't a splatter, Torres noted, crouching beside Ray. More like someone with bloody fingers handled it repeatedly. The most bewildering discovery came when Ray gently lifted a protective tarp in the corner, a military-grade GPS unit, its display still glowing with a faint blue light. "How is this still powered?" he whispered, almost to himself. The device should have died months ago, yet it hummed with life, displaying coordinates that made no sense given the team's planned route. As daylight began to fade, forensic technicians cataloged every item while Ray stepped outside, scanning the vast wilderness surrounding them. The tent's location made no logical sense. It was far from any established trail, positioned in an area that offered neither strategic advantage nor protection from the elements. "They weren't camping here," Ray said when Torres joined him. "They were hiding." The agent nodded silently, her typical procedural demeanor momentarily broken by the eerie perfection of the scene. It was as though the 10 climbers had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the barest evidence of their existence. "We need to get this journal and GPS unit to the lab immediately," Torres finally said, "and contact the families. Ray thought of Elena Volov, who had never stopped searching. "No," he replied. "Let me talk to Elena first. She deserves to hear this directly, not from a press release." Dr. Sarah Chen sat alone in her university office, the journal of the Apex expedition spread before her. As Jasper Chen's sister and a respected psychologist specializing in trauma responses, she had convinced Agent Torres to grant her temporary access to this crucial piece of evidence. The leather-bound journal, stained with what lab tests confirmed was Dmitry Volov's blood, contained entries that started predictably enough. The first 3 days documented weather conditions, team morale, and route adjustments. Sarah smiled faintly at her brother's handwriting, appearing occasionally in the margins, little jokes about Dmitry's excessive caution or notes about spectacular views. "Classic Jasper," she whispered, tracing his familiar scrawl with her fingertip. But on the 4th day, everything changed. The entry shifted dramatically in both content and tone. Sarah leaned forward, her professional training immediately recognizing signs of psychological distress in the handwriting. "Maintaining radio silence as advised. Unusual contact last night," read Dmitry's entry. No explanation followed, just a cryptic reference to lights on the North Ridge, where no climbers should have been. The psychologist took careful notes as she progressed through the increasingly disturbing pages. By day 6, the expedition leader was documenting strange sounds around their camp and decisions to alter their route. "Changed course again. Team agrees we should avoid the western face entirely. Unknown parties may have established position there." Sarah noticed how the handwriting deteriorated with each entry, becoming more slanted, the pressure on the page increasing, lines crossing over each other. Classic indicators of heightened stress and fear. The final pages were almost frantic. Dmitry described the team doubling back along ridges they'd already traversed, setting up decoy camps, and traveling only at certain hours. The last entry, dated October 14th, was particularly chilling. Written in the jagged, barely legible script, "We are being watched. No more signals." Then, nothing. Sarah closed the journal, her hands trembling slightly. As both a scientist and a sister, she recognized something beyond ordinary mountain danger in these pages. This wasn't the record of a team battling elements or making navigational errors. This was documentation of people being hunted. She reached for her phone to call Detective Castellanos. The journal wasn't just evidence. It was a psychological profile of a team under surveillance, experiencing mounting paranoia that, based on everything they were discovering, had been entirely justified. "Ray," she said when he answered, "I know what happened to them. They weren't lost. They were running." The forensic tech team worked through the night at the FBI field office in Seattle. When they finally managed to download the data from Dmitry Volov's military-grade GPS unit, what they found left everyone perplexed. Agent Sandra Torres stared at the digital map, her brow furrowed in confusion. "This makes absolutely no sense," she muttered, tracing her finger along the erratic path displayed on the screen. Ray Castellanos leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the digital breadcrumbs left by the Apex team. For the first 3 days, their route followed a logical path toward Mount Challenger's summit. Methodical, precise, exactly what you'd expect from experienced climbers. Then, something changed dramatically. "Look here," Ray pointed. On day 4, they completely abandoned their planned route. They doubled back, created these strange loops, almost like they were deliberately trying to confuse anyone tracking them. The GPS data showed the team zigzagging across ridges, doubling back on their own trail multiple times, and creating circular patterns that served no climbing purpose. It wasn't the behavior of mountaineers heading toward a summit. It resembled the movements of people evading pursuit. One of the analysts, a young woman who specialized in search and rescue patterns, highlighted a section of the trail. "These movements here suggest they were avoiding something or someone. Experienced climbers don't waste energy like this unless they have to." The most disturbing detail came from the final coordinates. The last recorded position placed the Apex team near a glacial crevice, in an area far removed from any marked climbing route. This location was dangerously close to where Ranger Morrison had discovered the yellow tent, a place no rational climbing expedition would choose to make camp. Could their device have malfunctioned? Torres asked, grasping for a logical explanation. Not likely, the tech responded. This is military-grade equipment. Dmitri was known for using only the most reliable gear. These patterns were deliberate. Ray stepped back from the screen, his mind racing. The GPS data confirmed what Dr. Sarah Chen had suggested after examining her brother's journal. Dmitri would never lead his team into danger without reason, she whispered. Something forced them off course. The bizarre GPS trail had transformed the investigation. This was no longer just a tragic climbing accident. The digital evidence pointed to something far more sinister unfolding on that mountain. Something that had sent 10 elite climbers scrambling for their lives. The ice around the yellow tent revealed more than just the Apex team's final location. As forensic teams carefully excavated the area, Detective Ray Castellanos noticed something unusual glinting in the morning sun. Fabric fragments embedded deep in the frozen ground. These don't match any of their gear, Ray muttered, carefully bagging the samples. When the lab results returned 3 days later, they confirmed his suspicions. The fibers were military-grade material, specifically designed for cold-weather stealth operations, a type never issued to park rangers, search and rescue teams, or recreational climbers. Ray immediately called FBI agent Sandre Torres to share his findings. They met at a small restaurant in Bellingham, away from the prying ears of their respective departments. The detective slid the report across the table, watching Torres's expression carefully. This material is restricted access, he explained, used exclusively by special operations and certain government contractors. Torres examined the report, her face betraying nothing. You're suggesting military involvement in the disappearance of 10 civilians? That's a serious accusation. I'm not suggesting anything, Ray countered. I'm following evidence. Someone with military-grade gear was up there when the Apex team vanished. Someone who never came forward during the search. The agent sighed, setting down her coffee cup. I'll make inquiries. But within 48 hours, the investigation hit an impenetrable wall. Torres called Ray from her office, frustration evident in her voice. Every agency I've contacted has stonewalled me. The Department of Defense claims no operations in the area. The Bureau of Land Management redirected me 3 times. Even my supervisor warned me to tread carefully. They're citing national security concerns? Exactly. No confirmation. No denial. Just bureaucratic silence. Ray thought of Elena Volov, who had been calling him daily for updates. The wife of Dmitri deserved better than government stonewalling. Someone's covering something up, he said, staring out his apartment window at the distant outline of the Cascades. And I don't think it's just about training exercises. That evening, Ray spread maps across his living room floor, marking the location where the tent was found against known military installations and training grounds. Nothing lined up, at least not officially. As darkness fell over Seattle, he realized the mountain wasn't the only entity keeping secrets. Whatever happened to the Apex team, powerful forces were ensuring those secrets remained buried under ice and bureaucracy. But Ray had lost his brother to a mountain silence once before. He wouldn't let it happen again. Not with 10 lives at stake and a yellow tent full of questions. Elena Volov stood at the podium outside Seattle City Hall, her voice unwavering despite the bitter January wind. My husband and 9 others didn't simply vanish. Someone knows what happened on that mountain. The crowd of nearly 300 supporters erupted in applause as Elena raised the enlarged satellite photo showing military-grade equipment tracks near Mount Challenger. After months of official silence, Elena had transformed her grief into action. the former climber organized weekly rallies that grew from a handful of family members to crowds that spilled onto downtown streets. Her persistence caught the attention of the Seattle Times, which ran a front-page feature titled "The Woman Who Won't Stop Climbing." "Elena doesn't just want answers, she demands them," said Marcus Reynolds, the Times journalist who followed her campaign, "and people are listening." Her approach was methodical. Elena established a foundation using her savings, hired media consultants, and leveraged social media to spread awareness. Within weeks, #FindApex was trending across the Pacific Northwest. By spring, Elena was testifying before a congressional subcommittee on public land use, demanding transparency about military activities in national parks. "They're hiding behind national security," she told reporters after the hearing. "But 10 American lives deserve more than bureaucratic silence." Dr. Sarah Chen often accompanied Elena to these events, providing psychological insight into the trauma families were experiencing. The university psychologist's academic credentials lent credibility to what officials tried to dismiss as emotional outcry. "This isn't just about closure," Sarah explained during a televised interview. "It's about accountability and preventing future tragedies." The movement gained unexpected momentum when an anonymous email reached Elena's foundation. The Apex team saw something they weren't supposed to. "Check the Northern Ridge. Where are facilities not on any public map?" The message came from a military email domain, though the sender's identity remained hidden. Detective Ray Castellanos verified the tip had merit. "The coordinates match areas we were specifically told not to search," he confided to Elena during their weekly strategy meeting at a small coffee shop near the waterfront. What had begun as a personal quest for answers had evolved into a national conversation about government transparency. Congressional representatives from Washington state faced mounting pressure to investigate, while military contractors issued carefully worded denials. Elena's apartment walls were covered with maps, timelines, and photographs, a command center for what the media now called the Volov Crusade. Each night, she added new information, connecting threads between whistleblower tips and official denials. "Dmitry always said mountains reveal their secrets to those patient enough to wait," Elena told a group of supporters. "I'm not waiting anymore. I'm climbing this mountain of lies until we reach the truth." The case that officials had hoped would fade into tragic memory had instead become impossible to ignore. The headlines that once read, "Missing climbers presumed dead," now demanded, "What happened on Mount Challenger?" Late April brought an unexpected twist to the investigation. Park Ranger Caleb Morrison, still vigilant after his earlier discovery, was conducting a routine patrol when something caught his trained eye. Nestled within a dense thicket, approximately 2 miles from where the Apex tent had been found, Morrison spotted an edge of fabric that didn't belong among the natural surroundings. What he uncovered sent shockwaves through the investigation team. A second tent, smaller, expertly camouflaged, and completely unregistered with park authorities, had been deliberately hidden from view. Unlike the bright yellow expedition shelter used by the Apex team, this tent was designed to blend into the landscape, utilizing military-grade camouflage patterns. Detective Ray Castellanos and FBI agent Sandre Torres arrived at the scene within hours. Their careful examination revealed contents far more disturbing than they had anticipated. Inside the tent lay sophisticated surveillance equipment, directional microphones, high-powered spotting scopes, and signal interceptors, all positioned to monitor activity on the mountain routes. "This isn't standard hiking gear," Ray muttered, carefully photographing each item. The detective's suspicions deepened when he discovered several ration packs scattered among the equipment. Each package bore the distinctive logo of Rainier Tactical Solutions, a private contractor known for security operations and specialize. Agent Torres examined the surveillance devices with growing concern. These are professional grade, designed for extended field operations. Her usual by-the-book demeanor faltered momentarily, and they're positioned to cover the exact route the Apex team would have taken. The implications were chilling. While families grieved and search parties combed the mountain, Unknown observers had maintained a hidden post, watching everything unfold. Most disturbing was the fact that whoever had established this surveillance point had never come forward during the massive search operation. Elena Vulov was immediately notified of the discovery. When shown photographs of the Rainier Tactical logo, her face hardened with determination. "Someone was watching them," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "Someone knew where my husband and his team were all along." Dr. Sarah Chen, analyzing the positioning of the surveillance equipment, concluded that whoever had set up the observation post had maintained visual contact with the climber's planned route for days. This wasn't random, the psychologist noted. This was targeted surveillance. As news of the second tent spread through the investigation team, the question shifted from what had happened to the apex climbers to who had been watching them and why they had kept their presence secret during the desperate search that followed. The mountain's mystery had suddenly become far more sinister. The encrypted email arrived at 3 in the morning, jolting Detective Ray Castellanos from a fitful sleep. The sender identified himself as Derek Hudson, former security specialist at Rainier Tactical Solutions. Ray had heard whispers about this private contractor, rumors of government black ops, and deniable operations, but nothing concrete until now. "I can't live with this anymore," Hudson's message began. What happened to those climbers wasn't supposed to go that far. Ray called Elena Vulov immediately, his voice tight with anticipation. "I think we finally have something," he told her, "the first real breakthrough in months." They met Hudson at a nearly empty diner outside Bellingham 2 days later. The former contractor looked haggard, constantly checking over his shoulder. His hands trembled as he slid a flash drive across the table. "The Apex team wasn't just in the wrong place," Hudson explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "They stumbled into a classified training zone where we were testing next-generation crowd control systems, equipment that isn't supposed to exist." The flash drive contained partially redacted maps, operation logs, and internal memos. The documentation placed heavily armed Rainier personnel on Mount Challenger during the exact week Dmitry and his team vanished. One memo dated October 14th noted civilian presence detected in Zone 3 and ordered immediate containment protocols. "We were told to detain anyone who wandered into the perimeter," Hudson continued, refusing the coffee Elena offered. "At any cost." The technology being tested was classified beyond top secret. Ray studied the man carefully. "Why come forward now?" "Because they're still out there," Hudson replied, eyes darting to the window. "Same equipment, different mountains. And because I helped track those climbers, I saw what happened when they tried to radio for help." The logs showed a deliberate communication blackout had been imposed on the area, explaining why search teams found no radio signals. More disturbing were the operational directives authorizing temporary detention of civilian witnesses and memory suppression protocols. "They weren't supposed to die," Hudson insisted, voice cracking. But the containment team panicked when they realized who Dmitry was, how connected he was, how much attention would follow if they just let them go. Before leaving, the whistleblower passed Ray a handwritten note with coordinates. "There's a facility, underground. That's where they took them initially. That's where you'll find proof." As Hudson walked away, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight, Ray and Elena exchanged glances. The mountain hadn't swallowed the Apex team after all. Men had. Men with government contracts and orders to keep their secrets buried, no matter the cost. Dr. Sarah Chen pored over her brother Jasper's journal for the 100th time, her trained psychologist's eye catching patterns others had missed. The handwriting analysis revealed a disturbing progression: neat, measured strokes deteriorating into jagged, slanting script over just a few days. "This isn't just fear," Sarah explained to Detective Ray Castellanos in her university office. "The erratic patterns, the looping trails on the GPS, they're consistent with subjects experiencing targeted psychological disorientation." Ray leaned forward, studying the maps she'd laid out. The Apex team's bizarre movements, doubling back, creating meaningless loops, abandoning logical roots, suggested they weren't just lost. They were being herded. Sound-based deterrence could explain everything, Sarah continued, pointing to specific journal entries. Military contractors have been developing directional sonic weapons for years. The team's symptoms, confusion, paranoia, the note about unusual contact. Elena Volov, who had been quietly listening from the corner, stood up with renewed determination. Dmitri wouldn't abandon their route without reason. He was too experienced, too methodical. Her voice caught slightly at speaking her husband's name. Within 48 hours, Elena had organized a press conference outside the Seattle Federal Building. Standing before a wall of cameras, she presented Sarah's findings with the precision of someone who had become all too familiar with public advocacy. Local stations broadcast her presentation live, capturing the moment she held up enlarged copies of the journal pages. "These are not the writings of climbers who simply got lost," Elena told the crowd, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "These are the writings of people being systematically manipulated and pursued." The Seattle Times ran the story on their front page the next morning. Public forums exploded with theories and demands for accountability. Former military personnel came forward, confirming that psychological warfare testing had occurred in remote wilderness areas before. The FBI, under mounting pressure, announced an official inquiry. Agent Sandra Torres was assigned to lead the investigation, though Ray noted her reluctance when they met at the field office. "This doesn't mean we're accepting these theories," Torres told him firmly, "but we need to address public concerns." Meanwhile, federal agencies issued carefully worded denials. The Department of Defense claimed no official operations had been conducted in the area. The Department of the Interior insisted park regulations had been followed by all authorized personnel. Sarah recognized the pattern in their statements. "They're denying specific allegations we haven't even made yet," she told Ray over the phone. "They're responding to questions we haven't asked. That's textbook defensive psychology." For the first time since the yellow tent had been discovered, the wall of silence was beginning to crack. The coordinates from Derek Hudson's encrypted message led Detective Ray Castellanos and FBI agent Sandra Torres to an unmarked trail that no recreational climber would ever discover. They moved under cover of dawn, their breath crystallizing in the frigid mountain air as they navigated toward a remote cave system northeast of Mount Challenger's summit. "This isn't on any Park Service map," Torres whispered, her usual procedural confidence wavering as they approached the narrow entrance, almost invisible beneath a natural rock formation. Ray checked his GPS unit one final time. "Hudson's intel puts the facility exactly 200 yards inside. If he's right about the security protocols, we have a 30-minute window while they rotate personnel." The cave mouth gave way to a narrow passage that suddenly widened into what appeared to be a natural chamber, except nothing about it was natural. The walls had been reinforced with industrial-grade materials, the floor leveled with concrete. Motion-activated lights flickered on as they entered, revealing a facility that sent chills down Ray's spine. "My God," Torres breathed, her flashlight illuminating rows of medical cots bolted to the floor. Each station was equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment. A separate area contained what appeared to be interrogation rooms, their walls lined with sound-dampening material. Ray moved methodically through the space, documenting everything with his camera. In a storage locker, he discovered climbing gear, high-end equipment bearing the same brand markings as the Apex team supplies. Most disturbing were personal items. A watch Ray recognized from photos as belonging to Dmitri Volov, a journal with Jasper Chen's name inscribed inside, and several backpacks with identification tags still attached. "Torres, over here," Ray called, his voice hollow as he opened a metal cabinet. Inside were labeled specimen containers, each holding items with visible bloodstains. "They need to run DNA tests on these immediately." The agent nodded grimly, her skepticism about Ray's theories completely evaporated. This is beyond a private contractor overstepping boundaries. This is systematic detention and—" She paused, unable to finish the thought. As they continued their search, Ray discovered a communications terminal with logs dating back to October 15th, the exact day the Apex team went silent. The facility had been operational for months before the climbers disappeared and remained active long after the search was called off. "They were here," Ray said, his hand resting on a weathered climbing boot. "They didn't just vanish or die in an accident. They were held here, against their will, while we were told to accept they were gone." Torres took a deep breath, her professional demeanor cracking. "This changes everything. The cover-up goes higher than Rainier Tactical, much higher." As they prepared to leave, Ray pocketed a small compass with Elena's initials, a gift she had mentioned giving her husband before his final expedition. The truth was undeniable now. The mountain hadn't claimed the Apex team. People had. Ray Castellanos stood at his kitchen window, watching two unmarked vehicles parked across the street from his Seattle apartment. The surveillance had become routine in the 3 weeks since he'd announced his intention to hold a press conference about the Apex findings. "They're still out there," he told Elena Volov over the phone, his voice betraying exhaustion rather than fear. "The Seattle Times just pulled their coverage," Elena replied. "Their editor received calls from 3 major defense contractors threatening to withdraw advertising. The backlash had been swift and coordinated. The Washington Post ran a profile questioning Ray's objectivity, highlighting his brother's disappearance as evidence of an unhealthy obsession. The detective's personnel file had somehow leaked, revealing a therapist's note about his difficulty separating personal trauma from professional duties. Ray's sister had called in tears the previous night. Someone had followed her children home from school, taking photos from a car window. His elderly parents received anonymous calls describing their daily routines in disturbing detail. "My captain wants me to take administrative leave," Ray said, watching a familiar black sedan roll past his building for the 3rd time that morning. "Says it's for my own good." The department had already reassigned him from active investigations. His colleagues maintained polite distance in the hallways, their silence a wall between him and 17 years of professional relationships. Dr. Sarah Chen had offered her professional assessment of the intimidation tactics. Classic isolation strategy. "They're trying to make you question yourself by removing all support systems." Ray opened his laptop to review the evidence again. The GPS data, the journal entries, the surveillance equipment from the second tent, it all pointed to a coordinated effort to detain and silence the Apex team. The underground facility, with its medical equipment and personal belongings, confirmed his worst suspicions. His phone buzzed with a text from Derek Hudson. "They're monitoring your accounts. Use the secure channel we discussed." The whistleblower had become Ray's most reliable ally, guiding him through the labyrinth of contractor security protocols and government deniability. On his refrigerator, Ray had pinned photos of all 10 Apex climbers. Dmitry Volov's confident smile, Jasper Chen's thoughtful gaze, 8 other faces whose families deserved answers. "My brother disappeared without a trace," Ray told Elena, his resolve hardening. "Nobody looked hard enough. Nobody asked the difficult questions. I won't let that happen again." He knew his career was effectively over. No police department would touch him after this. His pension might even be at risk. But as he looked at the photos of the missing climbers, Ray Castellanos understood that some prices were worth paying. "We go public tomorrow," he said. "All of it." Derek Hudson knew he was being watched. His apartment had been broken into twice, though nothing was taken. His phone calls dropped at odd moments, and unfamiliar vehicles lingered outside his building. Yet the former Rainier Tactical Solutions employee remained determined to expose the truth. Under cover of darkness, Hudson met Ray Castellanos at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Seattle. He passed a small flash drive across the table, his hands trembling. "Everything's here," Derek whispered. "Internal memos, operation logs, communication records. They'll deny it all, but the evidence speaks for itself." The files revealed a disturbing reality. Rainier Tactical had been testing experimental crowd dispersal technology in the remote regions of the Cascade Mountains. Technology that used infrasound waves to induce disorientation, paranoia, and confusion. The Apex team had unwittingly stumbled into the test zone. Ray spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the documents with Elena Vulov. The most damning evidence was an email chain between Rainier executives and Department of Defense officials, containing explicit instructions: do not allow civilian discovery, detain and contain if necessary. "They treated them like lab rats," Elena said, her voice breaking as she read through the files. The documents confirmed that after the climbers encountered the test site, they were pursued, captured, and held in the underground facility. What happened after their detention remained redacted, but blood samples and DNA analysis suggested medical experimentation. The detective carefully vetted the information before contacting journalists at the Seattle Times. When the story broke, it spread like wildfire. Within hours, national news networks picked it up, and by evening, social media exploded with outrage. Senator Maria Cantwell called for immediate congressional hearings. If private contractors are conducting unauthorized experiments on American soil that endanger citizens, those responsible must be held accountable, she declared in a press conference. Protesters gathered outside Rainier Tactical's headquarters in Bellevue, while others rallied at federal buildings in Olympia and Seattle. The hashtag Justice for Apex trended nationwide. For Ray, the vindication came at a cost. His superiors placed him on administrative leave for unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. Elena received anonymous threats. Dr. Sarah Chen faced pressure from her university to distance herself from the controversy. But Hudson's leaked files had accomplished what 17 months of conventional investigation could not. The wall of silence was crumbling. "They thought the mountain would keep their secrets," Ray told Elena as they watched coverage of the protests. But some truths refused to stay buried. In Washington, D.C., congressional staffers began preparing subpoenas. The reckoning that the families of 10 missing climbers had fought for was finally beginning. The congressional hearings began in Seattle's federal courthouse amid unprecedented public interest. News vans lined the streets for blocks, and protesters carrying photos of the Apex team gathered in silent vigil outside. Elena Vulov, dressed in black, with her husband's climbing pin on her lapel, entered the chamber with quiet dignity that belied her 17 months of relentless campaigning. "My husband Dmitry and 9 others didn't simply vanish," Elena testified, her voice steady despite the cameras. "They were silenced because they saw something they weren't supposed to see." She presented the leaked documents, pointing to redacted sections that showed deliberate containment protocols. Dr. Sarah Chen followed with clinical precision, analyzing the psychological evidence found in her brother's recovered journal. The psychologist explained how the erratic handwriting and paranoid entries matched known patterns of subjects exposed to experimental sonic deterrents. "These weren't the writings of climbers lost in a storm," she explained. "These were the desperate notes of people being hunted." The hearing room fell silent when Sarah displayed photos of personal items recovered from the underground facility, including Jasper's weathered compass, still bearing his initials. Senator Margaret Donovan from Washington State led the questioning, her outrage evident as she demanded answers from military contractors who declined to appear. "The people of this state deserve to know why private military operations were conducted on public land and why 10 lives were sacrificed to keep it secret." Meanwhile, Ray Castellanos watched from a coffee shop 3 blocks away. The detective had been officially barred from testifying due to ongoing investigation protocols, a transparent attempt to silence his first-hand account. Department superiors had threatened termination if he appeared. Instead, Ray became the invisible center of the media storm. Reporters from the Seattle Times, the Washington Post, and even international outlets met him in parking garages and remote diners. His methodical evidence collection and timeline reconstructions became the backbone of exposés that dominated front pages nationwide. "I'm just doing what anyone would do," he told a journalist from The Guardian, sliding a folder of satellite imagery across the table. These families deserve answers. Not everyone saw Ray as a hero. Conservative commentators labeled him a conspiracy theorist with a personal vendetta. His apartment was vandalized twice. The words "traitor" spray-painted across his door. Death threats arrived by mail. The political earthquake spread beyond Seattle. In Washington, D.C., 3 congressional committees announced investigations into military contracting oversight. Defense Department officials faced hostile questioning about black site operations in national parks. For Elena, watching from the witness stand, as her testimony trended nationwide, the moment felt both validating and hollow. No hearing would bring Dimitri back. But as she caught Sarah's eye across the chamber, she knew the mountain's silence had finally been broken. Despite the mounting evidence and public outrage, justice remained frustratingly elusive. The attorneys representing Rainier Tactical Solutions deployed an impenetrable shield of legal protections that left families and investigators stunned. Non-disclosure agreements, classified operation status, and claims of national security interests created a labyrinth that even the most determined prosecutors couldn't navigate. "They've built a fortress of paperwork," Elena Vulov told supporters at a rally outside the federal courthouse. Her eyes, once burning with righteous anger, now carried the weight of a different battle, one against a system designed to protect its own. The wife of Dimitri had transformed from grieving spouse to the unwavering voice of 10 silenced climbers. Ray Castellanos watched from the periphery, his badge now tucked away in a drawer at home. The detective had sacrificed his career pursuing the truth. Yet the high-ranking officials implicated in the cover-up continued their lives uninterrupted. When a junior prosecutor explained that the case would likely never see trial, he simply nodded, unsurprised but undefeated. "Sometimes the victory isn't in the courtroom," he told Dr. Sarah Chen over coffee near the university where she taught. "It's in refusing to let them bury the truth." Sarah, whose analytical mind had helped decode the psychological warfare tactics used against her brother Jasper and the others, understood this bittersweet reality all too well. The memorials began that spring. In Bellingham, where the expedition had launched with such hope, hundreds gathered at the harbor. Mountaineers from across Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia stood shoulder to shoulder, ice axes raised in silent tribute. The climbing community, tight-knit and fiercely loyal, refused to let the Apex team be forgotten. In Seattle, a more formal ceremony took place at the Mountain Climbers Memorial Park. Families placed personal items, a favorite carabiner, a well-worn climbing guide, a cherished photograph, into a time capsule that would be sealed within a granite monument. Caleb Morrison, the park ranger who discovered the tent, attended in uniform, his quiet presence a reminder that some within the system had chosen integrity over silence. Derek Hudson never appeared publicly again. The whistleblower who had risked everything to expose the truth disappeared into the Witness Protection Program, his testimony preserved, but his life forever altered. His final message to Ray was simple: some mountains you climb for the summit, others you climb because they're in the way of something greater. For the families of the Apex team, closure remained fragmentary. Pieces of truth recovered from darkness, but never the whole. They had learned that sometimes justice doesn't arrive in courtroom verdicts or prison sentences, but in exposed lies and remembered names. The mountain had claimed 10 lives, but their legacy would echo far beyond its silent, snow-covered peaks. The summer sun had begun to set as Ray Castellanos made his final ascent to the ridge where Caleb Morrison had discovered the yellow tent, 17 months after the disappearance. Though his knees protested with each step, Ray pushed forward, driven by a need he couldn't fully articulate even to himself. Mount Challenger loomed above, its peaks catching the last golden light, while shadows crept across the valleys below. The detective paused to catch his breath, surveying the vast wilderness that had swallowed 10 lives and nearly consumed his career. The site itself looked unremarkable now, just another patch of alpine scrub and stone, with no trace of the tent or the investigation that had followed. "I thought I might find you here," came a voice behind him. Elena Vulov appeared on the trail, her face weathered by grief, but her eyes clear and determined. "Just needed to see it one more time," Ray replied, his voice nearly carried away by the mountain wind. They stood in silence, two people bound by a search that had changed them both irrevocably. Elena placed a small stone cairn on the ground, a climber's memorial. Her hands, once accustomed to gripping rock faces, now moved with the practiced precision of someone who had built too many memorials. "Dmitri would have appreciated this view," she said finally. "He always said the mountains keep their own counsel." Ray nodded, remembering the journal entries, the GPS trails that led nowhere and everywhere, the facility they'd discovered with its sterile cots and military precision. So many pieces recovered, yet the full picture remained elusive, like a photograph with its center burned away. "Some questions will never have answers," the detective said, thinking of his own brother's disappearance decades ago. "But asking them matters." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Below them, Seattle's lights began to twinkle into existence, a world apart from this silent ridge. "The congressional hearings resume next week," Elena said. "Sarah's testifying about the psychological evidence again." Ray nodded. Dr. Chen had become the scientific voice of their cause, translating trauma into terms that lawmakers could understand. The psychologist had found purpose in her brother's absence, turning grief into action. As darkness settled over the mountain, Ray realized that the Apex team's legacy wasn't in the answers they'd found, but in the questions they'd forced the world to confront. The silence of the mountain would always remain, but it no longer had the final word. They descended together as the first stars appeared, leaving behind a place that would forever echo with untold stories. Stories buried in snow and stone, but no longer forgotten. The Apex tragedy fundamentally transformed how military operations intersected with public lands across Washington state. New legislation, dubbed the Challenger Transparency Act, required all government contractors to register their presence in national parks, with severe penalties for non-compliance. The families of the 10 climbers received formal apologies from 3 federal agencies, though no admissions of direct responsibility ever came from Rainier Tactical Solutions, which dissolved amid mounting lawsuits. Elena Vulov channeled her grief into purpose, establishing the Mountaineer Protection Foundation. Her testimony before Congress became the cornerstone of new regulations governing military exercises in wilderness areas. The once grieving widow transformed into one of the Pacific Northwest's most influential voices on government accountability. Her foundation now trains park rangers to recognize signs of unauthorized activities and provides legal support to whistleblowers like Derek Hudson. Dr. Sarah Chen's research on psychological manipulation techniques gained international attention. Her paper, Environmental Trauma and Covert Operations, became required reading in ethics courses at military academies. Sarah never fully recovered from losing her brother Jasper, but she found meaning in ensuring his fate would protect others. The psychologist now divides her time between her university position and consulting on trauma response protocols for wilderness search teams. Ray Castellanos retired from detective work after the congressional hearings concluded. The investigation had cost him his career advancement and strained his family relationships. But he carried himself with quiet dignity. At a memorial service in Bellingham, families of the Apex team presented him with a compass that had belonged to Dmitry Vulov, a gesture that moved the stoic detective to tears. "My brother disappeared into these mountains 30 years ago," Ray told the gathered mourners. "I never found him, but in searching for your loved ones, I found something of him again." The full truth of what happened during those 15 days on Mount Challenger remained partially obscured. Classified documents would stay sealed for decades, and some witnesses maintained their silence. Yet the yellow tent, now preserved in the Washington State History Museum, stood as testament to what happens when power operates without oversight. Every October 1st, climbers from across the country gather at Luna Cirque, lighting 10 lanterns that float into the night sky above the Cascades. The mountain keeps its secrets, but the names of the Apex team, etched on a simple stone marker, ensure that their story continues to echo through the valleys and ridges they loved. Their legacy lives on, not in conquest of peaks, but in the enduring human drive to illuminate darkness, however painful the light might be.